Good evening, everybody. Well, yesterday we had a video that talked about how we identified the quadratic, and today we're going to take a look at the characteristics of a quadratic function, axis of symmetry, vertex, the zeros. So I want you to make sure you've got your notebooks out, make sure you're copying down good notes, and be prepared to discuss them in class tomorrow. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the zero of a function. And the zero of a function, if we think about this, we say f of x equals, and then whatever the equation. The zero of a function is when f of x equals 0. Or another way of saying that is when y equals 0. So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. And what we're going to do is take a look at how we identify it looking from a graph. So the zero of a function is when my graph touches where y equals 0. So the zero of this function is x equals 2. Or you can write 2, 0. Okay, so the zero of a function is where the graph reaches y equals 0. In this case, it reaches it once. Here's another example where the y equals 0 at 2 spots. And so we would say that this has 2 solutions. One at x equals -1 and one at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, x equals 7. So the zeros of this graph are x equals -1 and x equals 7. And we say that it has 2 zeros or 2 solutions. Sometimes you'll hear them ask for what are the solutions to the graph, and all they're asking you for is where does y equal 0. And the last example, how many places does this graph cross the x-axis? Well, it doesn't cross at all, so we would say that this has no solutions, no zeros. Okay? Alright, so that's the first thing we're looking at. We're just taking a look at, if I give you a graph, and most probably the easiest way is if I gave you an equation and asked you how many solutions, you would plug the equation into the calculator, y equals, and hit the graph button and see how many times it crosses the x-axis. Alright, the next characteristic we're going to take a look at is something called the axis of symmetry. And the axis of symmetry is basically just like the mirror. Everything on one side is identical to everything on the other side. And so the axis of symmetry is just where the parabola gets split perfectly in half. Now the first way to find the axis of symmetry is if you have a graph which has one solution. The axis of symmetry can always be found at the vertex. So if you see a axis of symmetry, if you see a parabola which has one solution, just go to the vertex, and we know that the axis of symmetry will occur right where that vertex meets the x-axis. We say, because it's a vertical line, it has an equation. We say the equation is x equals 1, 2. So if I ask you for the axis of symmetry, I'm going to show you my shortcut nomenclature, AOS, I'm also asking you to write it as an equation, because it is an equation, it is a line, it's a vertical line, and we'll say that my axis of symmetry is x equals 2. Now there is a second method. We talked earlier about how every quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. Well, there is actually a formula to find the axis of symmetry, and the formula for the axis of symmetry is equal to negative b over 2a. So let's use this equation that we have here as an example. My b is -4, and I chose negatives for a very, very real reason I want you to make sure that you do put the negative negative. So it's negative, and then my b is negative 4 over 2 times a. In this case, my a is 1. Well, the answer is 2. Negative negative is the same as positive 4 divided by 2 equals 2. And then you can see we got the exact same answer. So the axis of symmetry can be found when we have one solution by looking at the vertex, locating where the vertex touches the x-axis, and then creating the x equals equation. Or we can use the equation itself, negative b over 2a, and plugging in the values from the original equation. Now the key here is when we do this, the equation has to be written y equals. You cannot have a number written over here. This couldn't be 4 equals x squared minus 4x. We always have to make it 0 equals x squared minus 4x plus 4. I guess that would be a negative 4 over there. Okay, so when we're going to set out to solve this, to find out where my axis of symmetry is, make sure your equation is y equals, or because we already said this, the y has to be 0, 0 equals, and then the equation has to look in that form just like this. Okay, let's take another example here. Okay, here we have two solutions. Line crosses the x-axis twice. So one method is to go to where the zeros are, and I've already labeled them, and just count how far apart they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 8 apart, divide that by 2, equals 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. We know that our point is 4 away from here and 4 away from here. So that's one method. The other method would be, and that point right here, 1, 2, 3, is 3, comma 0. Another method would be to take the two x points, negative 1 plus positive 7, this point here is 7, and divide it by 2. And so we have 6 divided by 2 equals 3. And that will tell me my point here. So two methods here, kind of combined. How far apart is my parabola at the zeros? It's 8, so I know that it has to be 4 this way and 4 this way, and I can just count. Or I can take the two coordinates, negative 1 and positive 7, add them together, divide by 2, and that would also give me my x-axis. Or we can use our final method, negative b over 2a. My b is negative 6, which means this is positive 6. My a is 1, which means 2. And again I get 3. And so if I were to ask you what the axis of symmetry is, you would tell me that it is, you would tell me that it's x equals 3. Okay? So that's pretty straightforward. We'll have plenty of time to practice that. Lots of different methods. Obviously, if you're given the graph and it's pretty easy to see where the zeros are, just counting across and dividing by 2. Or if you feel comfortable finding the two x's, adding them together. Or if you're just given the equation, then mathematically using the negative b over 2a. And we'll practice again in class tomorrow, so you can kind of decide which method you want to use. Again, if I'm given the graph, I'm going this direction. If I'm given the equation, I'm given this direction. Alright, the last thing we need to take a look at is to find the vertex. Now we've already said that if we have one solution, the vertex is going to be right at the very bottom. So that's pretty easy to find. But if I tell you specifically to find the vertex, the very first thing that you have to do every single time is find the angle, the axis of symmetry. In order to find the vertex, I have to know what the axis of symmetry is. Okay? So once I know where the axis of symmetry is, I know that the vertex will be on that line I'll know that the axis of symmetry will have that x in it. So to find the axis of symmetry of this equation, negative b over 2a, negative 10, negative 10, 2 times 5 is 10, negative is a positive, 10 divided by 10 is 1. So we know that my axis of symmetry is 1. And so we know we have a graph, we know that we have a line that goes through it, and the first ordered pair is 1 comma. After that, it's our choice. We can put this into our calculator and go to where x equals 1 to find what y is, or we can plug the number in here. And to be honest, I would prefer to use the calculator, less chance for mistake. But let's do it very quickly. 5 times 1 squared is 1 minus 10 times 1 plus 3. So we have 5 minus 10 plus 3. So negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. So I know that my ordered pair is 1 comma negative 2. My vertex is always an ordered pair. Okay? My vertex is a point, the lowest or highest point on my parabola, and it is always labeled as an ordered pair. My axis of symmetry is always labeled as an equation because it is a line, and it is the axis of symmetry that separates my parabola into two equal parts. So I hope that made a lot of sense to you. We will have a lot of chance to practice in class tomorrow, but you should be able to come in tomorrow prepared to be able to use the equation for the axis of symmetry. Use the equation of the axis of symmetry to discover the vertex. Tell me whether I have 0, 1, 2 solutions to a parabola or a quadratic, and what those solutions are. And you should be able to tell me how to find the axis of symmetry if I just give you a graph. If I brought up something that you don't know how to do right now, please go back and review that section of the video, and I will see you in class tomorrow. Good night.